Hello, Johnny Long here. I'm in the slightly odd position of reading out an advert about how we have no adverts on Escape Collective. Now, I don't think all ads are evil, but I definitely prefer our little world to exist without them. Our website is so clean, and our podcasts are blessedly free from any messages imploring you to buy some green gloop that would definitely make its way through your system quicker than the time it took to put your credit card details in to buy 6 months worth of the stuff. The trade-off here, in order to keep things nice and pure, is we need you, yes you, the person listening, to sign up to become an Escape Collective member. That's the only way we can make this membership-funded model work. We don't have to go with our begging bowl to marketing executives like the vast majority of cycling media do. I will not drink the green goop. You can't make me. If you are already a member, thank you so much. You are appreciated beyond words. And if you know someone who's on the fence about signing up, why not give them a friendly little nudge? Hey, if we sign up enough members, maybe I will drink the green goop after all. Go to escapecollective.com/member to sign up.
Welcome back to Performance Process, everybody. Kaylee Fretz joining Ronan McLaughlin as always. Ronan, we have a special guest today. One of the highest profile low-key dudes on the planet.
That is the perfect description there, yeah, definitely.
Who are we talking to?
We're talking to Lachlan Morton, and it kind of came about after his Unbound win, and we certainly touched on that in the podcast. Some of the focus he had on that race for this season, some of the training he had done, talk a bit about his bike. But actually, it's mostly just a Lachlan Morton on Lachlan Morton podcast. It was it was a lot of fun to record.
And I should also mention, as a bit of a teaser here, he dropped some major news.
Yes, very big news.
Big news
about what Lachlan's doing next, or what he's
doing.
What he's
next.
currently planning on doing in the very, very near future. In terms of the alt calendar that he he tells us about how he likes to do one of these extra wild things once per year rather than just the regular wild that he does almost on a daily basis. And this one is...
It's pretty far. It's really far, isn't it?
It's about 15,000 kilometers.
Whoa!
It's not set in stone yet. He's still in the process of planning it. But I think if all the listeners to this podcast now, I don't know, if they let the team and everybody know just how much we want to see Lachlan try this, I think that could
everybody tweet at Jonathan Vaughters.
Yes, that would probably
everybody
be with this podcast, a link to this podcast,
and say let him do it. Quick bit of housekeeping here. We are it's not that Performance Process is taking a hiatus. It's that during the Tour de France, next couple weeks, it's chaos, right? And frankly, the Tour de France kind of takes over everything. So there will be some bonus episodes of Performance Process, but we're gonna not be doing the every other week standard show for a couple weeks over the summer here. So keep an eye out for episodes, and of course we will be chatting about those in the Tour Daily, etc. But do not expect an episode to drop every other Friday as normal in the month of July. All right, let's get into the chat with Lachlan.
Lachlan Morton, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining us today. I'm going to kick off with a bit of information, I think, for you, in that my wife sort of loosely follows cycling. She doesn't watch much racing, but there are 3 riders that if those riders achieve a result or a win or something, she'll comment on it to me. Those are Lizzie Deignan, Sam Bennett, and Lachlan Morton. So I don't know what that says about what you've achieved or what you've created or done over the last few years with the Alt Tour, but I'm sure you probably get that sort of message quite a bit.
It's definitely always surprising the kind of reach that some of the rides I've done get, but it's nice, mate. Like, people seem to take more interest in some of the stuff I've done recently outside of racing than they do the racing. So it's kind of like confirms like my feelings about like my place in the sport a little bit, I guess.
Yeah, I said the Alt Tour. I meant the Alt calendar. You've done a heck of a lot more than just the Alt Tour. But I think like something about two World Tour professionals winning World Tour races, and then the stuff that you do being so different. I think you've captured it pretty succinctly there, in that it's just so different and refreshing and interesting. And I think they stand out to her as just how wild some of the stuff is. Before we get into, we're here to talk about Unbound, obviously, but before we get into all that, I mean, when you're doing these things, does it, like the Tour Divide last year, do those sorts of things strike you as a bit wild when you're doing them, or is that just a normal day out for Lachlan Morton?
That's an interesting question, mate. I was just catching up. The Tour Divide, like mass start, is on at the moment, and I was checking the dots this morning, and they've had some like gnarly weather, and just like looking at the spots where I know they are, it seems so much more intense from the outside. Like you look at these dots and you think, damn, these guys are exposed out there. Like, what are they going to do tonight? During it, I find it like actually very sort of simple. I've only a few times bitten off like more than I can chew, and then was humbled pretty quickly to the point where like I try and take on things as I have gained enough experience to do it. The satisfaction comes from not necessarily just going fast, but like doing it in a way where you feel like you have some control in it. Obviously, there's too many variables to control everything, but it's about doing it in a way where you're not like taking big risk, and you're sort of not within yourself, but not sticking your neck out too far. So it doesn't feel like as crazy, I guess, doing it as it does observing it. It's funny, and also like I think doing those things is when I honestly feel like most like myself, really. It's like weird cross section of skills that I picked up over my life, that kind of apply really well to one small thing, and it feels nice to do things that you're good at. In regular life, I think there's not a bunch of things I'm really good at, so it's good to do something you're good at.
Yeah, well, I'm sure that's not true, but we're here today to talk about Unbound. I guess a good question to kick us off was like you've I don't know if tick the box is the right thing to say, but you've been so close on Unbound a few times. You've achieved the win this year. Was that the goal for the entire season?
Yeah, I had it as like a big goal this year. I've raced the Lifetime Series a couple of times now. That race has just like stuck out to me for a number of reasons. I think like it suits my abilities pretty well, but also like it does require a lot of different skills, and it's a lot of different things to put together on one day. So it's a really unique, interesting challenge. Like last year, I surprised myself a bit there, being pretty close, and I thought I'll just like make that the priority for the first half of the year, and chase that, and just see what I can do there. I just wanted to go there and have a good race, and be involved in, the front of the race where it's continually like getting quicker, and, more and more riders are coming, and, pretty amazing caliber riders. So it's fun to be at the front in that race. And I just wanted to be like up there and involved in it again. And also, I'm pretty sure this would be the last like time I raced the Lifetime Series. I was like, I'll give it a red hot crack,
It's kind of, it's interesting to me. I think having not closely followed the Lifetime Grand Prix, and knowing that, watching everything you do on YouTube, and knowing that you had, stepped away from being a World Tour rider with EF, and now being like a rider within the team, but not UCI contracted or licensed or whatever way that setup works. I'm not entirely sure, but it seemed like it was I don't want to say a surprise either, but it was a very pleasant surprise to see the result pop up that Lachlan Morton won, because I thought you were moving further and further away from targeting the likes of Unbound in that, but actually you turned up and not just targeted, but actually, won it.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because the space I've moved into has increasingly like become similar to the space I was in before, in terms of like, increasing levels of professionalism and the intensity of the racing. I think the racing itself is still pretty vastly different, because it's still chaotic. It still takes place in gravel road. It's still very different than a road event. But in terms of like the way people go about preparing, obviously all the training concepts and, improvements in like human physiology, all that stuff just like trickles over, which is understandable because there's a lot of people who are full-time, racing gravel, and that's their livelihood. We're sort of like unsure as to how far I was willing to go in terms of like how I prepare, because I didn't really want to go back to how it used to be for me training and doing it when I was professional. So yeah, it was like an interesting thing to see if I could go about it, in my own kind of way and still be competitive there. And it's kind of reassuring to see that it is possible. I got to do it in a way where, if I think back at like big road wins or results I had, it always involved like quite a bit of sacrifice, and then you achieve something, and then it's like a release, and you're like, oh, great, I can finally do all these things I haven't been doing for the last like few months,
Mm-hmm.
Whereas with this, it was like I won, and then I was like, oh, sweet, I can't wait to get back home and just go back to exactly what I was doing, before I came to this race, which was nice. Like, because I honestly, I wasn't sure that was possible in especially a race like Unbound now, where it is like such a big, high profile event.
I've got a list of things that I think you're going to confirm you didn't do. Just on that note, I'm assuming you didn't like go to a wind tunnel or altitude training camps, or some of the things that we know riders will do to improve performance. So that, perfectly legitimately, but I don't get the impression that's the sort of thing you were doing. But I do know that you changed coach this year. Do you think that had an impact?
Yeah, so I started coaching with Dennis Van Wundem about 18 months ago. And before that, I didn't have a coach for quite a long period. And not having a coach definitely worked, especially when I was kind of starting to do a bit of everything, because it was also like I was doing so many different events all the time that it was hard to really train specifically for anything, and I was just kind of riding my bike a lot. And then that seemed to translate to being like pretty versatile. And then I did the first year of Lifetime, I think, and I was like, okay, this level's getting higher. If I'm going to show up at these races, I want to be like racing at the front because it's more fun.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't want to overhaul everything. Like, I really enjoy having a lot of freedom in the way I train and ride. But he was good at implementing just a few things that you need like someone from outside to look at, to really like, okay, if you just do these couple of sessions a week and maybe rest a bit more here, and just helping like structure what a season kind of looks like. He was really helpful with that. But I think the biggest thing was he sort of had this belief that, I could be competitive in these races and still do the other things I wanted to do outside of it, which like I wasn't entirely sure of. So I think that helped a lot. It's been a long kind of process of finding the sweet spot, because I'll find that like, even earlier this year, I had this goal at Unbound, and I started wanting to do more and more specific training, thinking that was like, looking at what everyone else is doing and thinking like, okay, I think that's what I need to do. And then kind of getting sick of it after like 3 weeks and being like, okay, I don't want to do anything anymore. So there's still like that process, but I think like we've definitely found a nice sweet spot where like, if he gives me a couple of workouts a week, I'm like excited to do them because it's different than what I normally do. And then there's lots of freedom outside of that to kind of just go and ride and do the things I like to do. So yeah, it definitely helped, because, I used to just kind of ride 30 or 35 hours every week, just, go out on my mountain bike and just spend all day out there. And it's harder to like translate that to a race performance now without like some little tweaks in there.
Would it be fair to say he's getting you to do less of the stuff that you really want to do and more of the stuff that you maybe would have otherwise just passed over? Like, and does that just directly translate into less 10-hour spins and more VO2 max efforts?
I mean, I guess in some way, yeah. I think we find ways of doing it where it kind of links in with what I like to do already. And, I'm not like a big fan of, VO2 max sessions. So Yeah. So like, instead we'll if they're like absolutely necessary, like yeah, that's fine. I'll go and do it. But if we can find like normally I'll go and do a bunch ride where I can like hit all those things and mentally it's still fun. And then like, if I'm doing a big massive loop and there's a few climbs in there, it might just like to be step on the gas on the climbs. Like that kind of takes care of the efforts I'm trying to achieve or replicate.
I always wonder if that's just more like the less specific it is, almost the more race specific it is, because races aren't decided in 3 minute and 33 second intervals or 4 minute recovery periods. They're decided in random efforts here, there, and everywhere.
Yeah, and I think like I used to be very like if I had a workout to do, especially when I was younger, it was about like really nailing it and thinking that that's how it had to be. But I've kind of learned that if I look at like roughly what a workout is and like, okay, what's this trying to achieve, and then if it's let's say it's a effort where you're like going really hard for a few minutes and building up a bunch of lactate and then going into like a longer tempo effort, it doesn't matter if that first bit's a minute long or 3 minutes long, as long as you're like building up a bunch of uncomfortable lactate. And then the tempo, it's like, it doesn't matter if it's, always sitting exactly at 300 watts. It's like you're just at a higher intensity where you're trying to clear that. And it doesn't matter if that's perfectly, on a steady grade or on a gravel hill where maybe you're going up and down a bit more, or, even if it's a rolling road or whatever it is. I've realized that like your body doesn't really know the difference and there's ways to achieve it. And I've gotten a lot better at just being a bit easier on myself in terms of like, when I'm doing the intervals, I don't really watch the numbers really strictly. I just like understand the feeling, right? So it's like if you're doing a hard effort where you're supposed to be producing a lot of lactate, instead of being like, oh man, this is already hurting and like, I suck at this. It's more like, oh, this is the feeling I'm supposed to be having. This is like the goal of it. And the numbers that come out at the other end, they're not really relevant because it's just you're at where you're at, and work is just kind of work. So that's helped me a lot, I think, and it also helps me enjoy it more and not like it used to be. It felt like every time you do an interval session, it was a bit of like a test, whereas now it's just like, okay, it's just a stepping stone to what I'm trying to do, which is ultimately like arrive at a race where I've enjoyed the process on the way, and then I can enjoy the race more because I'm more competitive. So yeah, that's kind of how I go about it.
I mean, yeah, some of that's just so refreshing to hear. Like it's just it sounds like just a much nicer way to train than just being purely regimented to a program. I'm curious, how long does it take to, like, for lack of a better term, switch between modes? Like, how long after a 12.5 day Tour de Ride can you turn around and start training for an Unbound? And how long after winning Unbound do you need to wait before you can do something like that again?
It's very variable, I think your body kind of reacts pretty differently each time. Like, after I did, say, the Alt Tour, I think I was at Leadville a month later and I was second or third. I can't remember. I was competitive either way. It wasn't a huge recovery period. I felt sort of fine coming out of it. Pretty similar experience with doing like GB Duro too. It's hard to put your finger on what the recovery is going to be like. So I'm normally pretty just like fluid afterwards. I think like it took me a minute to come back from Divide last year because I finished Divide and then, like 4 days later I was racing the Schwarmigan mountain bike race, which is like a 2-hour flat out thing. And then, yeah, I mean, not bad considering, but I think like it just took more of a toll. Also just traveling and doing things in the off season last year. And I spent some time in Kenya and then we did like a film tour with the Divide film. And
how did that go?
it took longer to recover. And when I started training again, it felt like I was just like a step ahead of, well, I was trying to be a step ahead of where I really was. Yeah, it just took a while to get the ball rolling. And the mistake I made was thinking like, okay, I need to be, like I said earlier, more specific with it, push harder, when in reality I just need to like let it go a bit, which, eventually I sort of just reassessed, what I was doing, and went back to sort of really loosening the reins a bit and just having a bit more fun riding, which I think like the relaxing helped. But I think like your body's capacity to compete or perform at different durations and disciplines is a lot greater than people think. I think like the thing with ultra and that kind of distance, I think if you look after yourself in a way where you don't really run out of food, you stay pretty hydrated and you get decent sleep, it doesn't have as big a toll as people think. I've never specifically trained for ultra stuff, in terms of like, preparing for something like Divide last year. I just did I was racing, like, I think I did Leadville, Breck Epic and Steamboat like in a row, which was like eight days of racing, and then went home for 2 days and then jumped in the car and drove to Canada, and then just did Divide, knowing that like, okay, it's the preparation's not like ideal, but your body picks it up pretty quick. So after a few days, you sort of get in the groove and your body accepts what's happening, and then away you go. But like, I enjoy mixing it up like that. I think the biggest thing is like, for me, the thing that helps the most is finding something like once a week where I try and use like local racing as much as I can, or if there's no racing on, I'll go and do, a local fast ride or something where you really like forced to kind of go through all your zones in a way, but not in a way that, well, for me, I like doing it in a way that's like kind of fun, where you just like trying to race someone else. I think doing that like pretty frequently, along with, I ride along a lot of hours just because I enjoy it. So like, I think the kind of duality of that helps with the flexibility a bit.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head there for what you've done for myself, watching what you've achieved over the last few years, and just giving viewers and giving myself even just the confidence that you can go and do a 500k ultra and also race a 1 hour or 2 hour race or whatever it might be, and you can mix those things perfectly functionally. So yeah, I think you're really hitting the nail on the head there. The other thing we're here to talk about today is your bike from Unbound. We haven't really actually talked about Unbound all that much yet, but we've been sidetracked a bit. I think it's fair to say you're a bit famous for being a footerer or a tinkerer with your bike position and that quite a bit. I think yourself and Eddie Merckx are using my justification for adjusting my cleats or my saddle height pretty much every day of the week. I want to ask you, like, what are your goals when you're tinkering with your position, and how much tinkering do you actually do? Is it like just saddle height, or are you changing everything from one day to the next? And
yeah, I change a lot. It's
good. That's what I wanted
like,
to hear.
I think it comes from a number of different motivations. I think I spend a lot of time riding, so you just kind of, you think a lot about your interaction with your bike and the way your body's functioning, performing that like pedaling motion. It's always I don't know if you've ever done much running. I mean, I don't do a lot of running, but I've occasionally got to that point where you can run and you feel completely natural, which is like you're sort of floating and your body's performing a function that it feels like is second nature, which is hard to achieve with a bike because you're using like a fixed instrument, right? Mm-hmm. So essentially the holy grail is to achieve that feeling on a bike. But, your body's constantly changing. And so just out of like fascination, I just try a lot of different things. And I think I really started to think about it a lot when I used the flat pedals during the Alt Tour. And I was like, oh, wow, this is such a different way to pedal. And you can achieve such a different feeling like this. And then, I tried from like essentially like a midfoot position to cleats right at the front to like a huge amount of setback to like no setback, like short stems, really long stems, just out of curiosity to see the way it feels when you ride. And then also like the different types of riding. because I think with the thing that people don't necessarily acknowledge with bike fit is it's all a compromise. You achieve one thing at the cost of something else. So there might feel a lot more efficient to pedal in a certain position, but it might affect the handling of the bike quite a bit. At least with how frame geometry is now, which I think will evolve. But so I'll adjust things quite a lot, and I'm happy to adjust things based on the type of ride I'm going to do. Because there's definitely certain positions and setups that favor certain terrains. But I mean, I probably adjust something every day just to see, just to see how it feels, and kind of constantly on that chase of okay, what if I did this? Even during Unbound, for example, I was riding. I'd made a fair few adjustments before the race, as you do. It's easy to think right afterwards, you kind of forgot with winning and that a whole bunch of things happened, and you think oh yeah, sweet, I've got it nailed now. That worked really well. And then I went back out in the group ride on the same setup on Saturday, and then had the same feelings that I remembered from the start of that race, and I was oh yeah, I was going to adjust that. So then it all starts again, so yeah, it comes out of a curiosity, and my ultimate goal is a comfort thing. That's kind of what I'm trying to achieve, is a feeling of comfort when I'm riding at the intensities I like to ride at.
I mean, we're very much at risk of me scrapping the rest of the notes for this podcast and just going deep down this rabbit hole here. The one thing I do have to ask you about from what you've just said is frame geometry is evolving in future, and I'm curious in what way you think. Is that I'm convinced we're going to have to go for longer front centers at some point. Is that sort of what you're thinking also?
I think longer front centers, steeper seat tubes, I think will slowly creep in. You're already sort of starting to see a few manufacturers. Even the latest road bike I have has a nice steeper seat tube. They tend to be in the smaller sizes, which I think you should see a trickle up to bigger frame sizes. But there's a lot of stuff that they do in mountain bikes already that I think makes a lot of sense. And I think there's so much innovation in road racing and gravel racing, but then frame geometries haven't changed a whole bunch, which I think will change. But there's things you could do. The top seat clamp I used for Unbound was I took the top seat cap and switched it for a reverb one, which gave me an extra 1.5 centimeters of ability to move the seat forward. And essentially you're just trying to modify the geometry just through little hacks. I mean, I think if I look at the frame geometry I want, essentially the hardtail I have is the right bike. If I could just adjust everything over and have a road setup on it, because if you look at a mountain bike, they're for a similar size. Let's say you have a medium cross country bike, and then you run a 54 road bike. A mountain bike's about 5 centimeters longer now, which is huge, and the seat angle's quite a bit steeper. So I think you'll sort of see that come in, or at least that'd be nice for me.
Yeah, I mean, if we look at your Unbound bike, the interesting things about that were the saddle, as you mentioned, slammed all the way forward, but then also quite aggressively nose down. And then zooming in the pictures that I've seen, it seems like you've got a mountain bike, an SLK negative angle stem, aero road bars, 45mm deep rims, which I thought was interesting. But then more interesting than that was just an offset tire choice. So you had a 50mm front, if I remember correctly, and that was an MTB tire, and then you had a 44 on the rear. Do you want to talk me through a bit of that, how you landed on that setup?
That just came through trying to make the gravel bike more capable for the riding I normally do. So I just slowly started to run bigger and bigger tires until I kind of maxed it out And to really max it out, that involved, like a 2.1 on the front and then a 45 in the rear. With what tires are available to me, that's kind of like as big as I can go. And just the feeling of like a bigger front tire does like slacken the bike out quite a bit. And again, if we want to get like nerdy, it also like
Yes, please.
it also slackens the seat angle. So like again, like the seat looks incredible. Like I think the setback was roughly or just inside of 5 centimeters. But if I was running 2 tires the same size, it'd be closer to inside of 4, because it just kind of adjusts the way the whole bike is. But I like the handling, the way it handles it when it's a little bit slacker, especially like higher speed, makes it a bit more stable. And then, running like a low stem and like your position forward, you put a lot more weight through the front wheel, which it's important to have a bit more tire there then. But learning through mountain biking that weight on the tires is a good thing. It helps also with handling, which looking at it, I'm sure a lot of people would get on my bike and have trouble riding it for a little while until they worked it out, especially coming from road where you sort of like trying to stay over the rear wheel, and limit the weight in the front tire. But then I think if you come from mountain biking where like you need to keep that weight like in the tires if you want them to work, that like helps. But yeah, I was riding bigger tires, and the more I rode them, I was just, I think this is faster, especially as the speeds have increased in gravel racing, the amount of vibration that you get back through the road, if you're riding at 45 k's an hour down a gravel strip is huge. And so like bigger tires just made more sense. And then last year before Unbound, I wanted to like test that idea. And so I just found a little gravel strip, outside of Boulder, and went there with Tom, who's my mechanic, and we just tested a bunch of different tires, just like very basic. Like I just rode the same stretch, or I rode like a flat stretch, an uphill stretch, and a downhill stretch, all at the same power, and the bigger tires were much faster. So since then, I've trended towards the bigger tires, and yeah, I like running the front low, so I can essentially have like a more relaxed position. It sounds like counterproductive, but like you can kind of straighten your arms out a bit more. You don't have to run your arms like kind of bent and tight. You can relax a bit more, which I think in a long race like Unbound helps quite a bit. So your arms are like quite a bit straighter, and you just sort of absorbing the impacts at less cost. So that's kind of how I wound up, with that position. And ultimately it's like, again, it's a comfort thing. I find I can sort of sit there and pedal away all day long at like a less cost, I guess, to the body.
You mentioned tire testing. How much are you into, or how much are you chasing marginal gains?
Yeah, it's like, I'm interested in like small adjustments on the bike, the way those things make the bike perform. Yeah, there's so much now with like aerodynamics and all that I'll be the first to admit I don't understand aerodynamics very well, and like I kind of just take it, on face value. If they said this jersey is faster than that jersey, okay, I don't know, ride the faster jersey. And even like I ran the space helmet, the air helmet.
I have a question on that.
Okay, yeah, and again, like I didn't have one before, and then Tom had one in his garage because he'd been at the Road Nationals, and I think it was gear they were going to send back to Europe. And we're like, let's just try this thing. And then again, wanted to hate it because it's ridiculous, and then wore it, and I was like, this thing's actually nice. I like the visor, can see a lot. It feels like I'm in my own little world, and if it's faster, like sweet. Yeah, I think like those little things, they somewhat interest me. I'm not like obsessed over those details, but I think the things that interest me more are like taping tire plugs, and your gear cables, and like where you store like spares, and like those little things interest me, because it's like a functional something that is very tangible. Whereas I guess like aerodynamics, you don't really feel the difference, I guess.
I think what you described just before that, like the change in trying to get weight through the tires and everything described about your position, I think you're thinking marginal gains on an entirely different level to what most are. Like we say marginal gains and we think about things like eating ice slushies and aerodynamics and rolling resistance and that. I think you are, from what you're telling me, I'm hearing you're deep into the marginal gains weeds, but just on a different way than the rest of us. So that's pretty interesting.
I think of marginal gains and you think of like a lab or a wind tunnel and that kind of thing. Whereas I think the gains and marginal gains that I make are all just like me messing around in the garage out the back. You know, it's like
yeah, changing seat clamps.
Yeah, exactly. And in this space, like you can do that. I think like when I was racing on the road, there wasn't any room to really do that. You know, you felt like you were like pulling teeth to get the mechanic to move your saddle a few mils or something. So you just sort of like left it. So it's fun to like, I enjoy messing around with that now because like I can.
Finally, just on your position then, with all the changes you make, do you ever like ask for a bike fitter's opinion on how Kevin fit, or?
You know, I did earlier this year because I was like, I just want to see like how far off a traditional am I, and I'm a long way. So, like, I think like again, it's just about like messing around with things and finding something like you're comfortable with, and if it feels good, then it's probably good. You know, I think if you have like specific issues and you can't get comfortable on your bike, then like bike fitters are professionals, you know. It's not like a pseudoscience, but it's like, yeah, I think like, I mean, bikes are, they're supposed to be like a fun thing that you can play with, and the way you set them up can radically adjust the way you feel riding it and then the way it performs. So like, why not play with it?
Yeah, modern bike fitting is fantastic, obviously, but as we've discussed many times in this podcast, I think we are moving away from hard and fast rules and angles and that, and closer to just what feels better and also what performs better in various conditions.
Yeah, having that curiosity to change things and just be honest in the way they feel, I think is a good thing. Even during the Tour Divide last year, from when I started to when I finished, I think my seat was probably 3 centimeters lower at the end, and my cleats were about 2.5 centimeters further back by the time I finished. You know, like just because.
Could you have been under 12 days if you weren't adjusting your position so much?
Probably, mate. Yeah, I would have spent ages doing it. I remember sitting in like a gas station in the bathroom, trying to kill 2 birds with 1 stone and like adjusting my cleats while I sat in the toilet. But like, I mean, that's just like your body changes, and like the demands are so different. You know, I was coming from like trying to race Leadville to trying to survive for 4 days, 2 weeks, like pedaling, you know. So I think like you need to adjust for the demand of what you're doing.
I did say I had a question about the helmet. I was basically just going to ask you to talk to me about the helmet because it's not something I was expecting to see Lachlan Morton wearing. But I mean, you've already sort of described how you got there, and again, I think it just sort of demonstrates your willingness to check out how things, if things work, you're sort of happy to go with. Yeah,
I mean, to be honest, the first time I saw that the helmet was, I was in Kenya helping with the Armani training camp there, and POC came out and they showed me this helmet, and I was like, oh, this thing's horrible. You know, like, God, this is what we're doing now. Like, God. And then I was sort of like, okay, not interested. You know, I think it's one of those things that if you're going to go and compete, you just kind of have to accept where the sport's at, you know. I remember the same thing like when we all started wearing skin suits on the road, and I was like, oh, this is dumb. I keep wearing my jersey. And then it gets fast enough to the point where you're like, I kind of need that skin suit. So, you know, like if you're going to show up and play the game, you got to play the game, right? Yeah, it's like a elite level competition. It is like an arms race in that way. You know, I think it's still inventive and fun, like in the gravel space. But like, yeah, you just kind of realize you're like, all right, that's what we're doing. We're going to race faster, and everyone's going to use their fastest gear. So like, you know, let's go for it. it is funny. I was thinking because it wasn't a super hot day at Unbound, which like I think if it was a really hot day, the helmet might get uncomfortable. But I like the idea of everyone turning up next year in an aero helmet that's like 35 degrees and everyone's just thinking they have to wear this aero helmet. But yeah, I don't know. It's like it was also helpful for me to like. It's the first time I'd worn aero socks and I put the helmet on. You're kind of like, all right, I'm here for business. Let's race. And like as a mindset thing, it was also, I think, helpful.
Yeah, I mean, you certainly were there to race. You actually attacked solo twice, I think. You went solo, took a wrong turn, went back into the bunch, rode across solo to Chad Higa, and then, yeah, took it from there. Like, the question I was going to ask you is, like, you didn't have a power meter, so we don't actually know how your power compared to previous efforts, but how much was strategy at play and how much was just a change in getting a coach and changing mindset and all the aero equipment and all that? And did it actually just on the day come down to that feeling that actually if I want to win this, I need to go early and I need to go hard?
It's a combination of so many things, to be honest. It's like in a race like that, you really use like all your skills. If it's technical skills, your ability to ride in a group, your tactics, pacing, and then your physical abilities, like all those things have to come together. I think for that race, I very deliberately didn't have a plan. I think anyone who had a real plan going into that was kind of kidding themselves because you had a field that we'd never had there before. So like it was always going to play out in a strange way. And, even like that first attack I made was like a big miscalculation because normally there's no team tactics, right? So it seems like stupid to attack 200K to go. But in a regular gravel race, it's like you'd normally slowly drag people out and try and have like a faster group at the front and people would buy in. But instead, like I went and then there were just two teammates like giving themselves up on the front to chase, which like I'd never experienced before. So it was like, okay, that was my miscalculation and then had to adapt, the strategy based on that. But I think like in a race, like essentially my goal was I was like, we need to make this race as hard as we can from a long way out. So everyone gets really tired still with a long way to finish because that's a feeling that like potentially some of the people new to that race wouldn't be used to and would maybe think, oh, damn, there's still 100K to go and I'm like in serious trouble here. Whereas if you've done that race before, you're like, oh, that's normal. This is where it starts, So that was kind of like the only thing I really wanted to achieve after seeing how the race was unfolding and, trying to play it to my strengths. And then also like you need, like I was on a good day, two ways about it, I think otherwise like the biggest effort I probably made of the race was riding by myself, like initially, which like normally you can't make two of those. When I finally got away from that other group and then could close across to Chad like pretty quickly, I was like, okay, I'm on a good day here, which like also, recognizing that you take a lot of, I anyway took a lot of encouragement from. It's like, I can win this, like I think I've done well in this race before and I've felt a lot worse this deep in. So you're like, okay, this is a day to make it happen.
Nice one. Well, you did make it happen. I'm assuming then the challenge actually becomes and when you've got good legs like that and you're good, it's actually like using them right, as is often the case. But you did go on to win Unbound. You don't strike me as the kind of person who needs to win it 2, 3, 4, 5 times. In fact, I don't think you ever do anything twice. So you've also said earlier in this podcast that you don't think you'll do lifetime Grand Prix again. Is that you saying that Lachlan Morton's done with gravel racing, or how far into that should we read?
Yeah, no, I'm just like I think it's a really great series, and I've wanted to be a part of it because I think it is the future of like racing in the US. So to be part of it as it's grown, to sort of see it really take a step each year is like very cool. It's been a fun thing to be a part of. But yeah, I just I can't imagine getting motivated again to race the same 7 races just purely from like a if I'm honest with myself. Like if I was super stoked and motivated to go and do it again, I would. But I just happy doing it this year. But I can't imagine getting ready for the same sort of goals again next year. I need to like find something new, which will still involve racing. It's just kind of broadening the scope and see what else is out there, because it's such a cool and interesting time that there's so many different bike races going on in the world. So many different events. There's a lot I still want to go and experience and see and try. So that's kind of where that motivation comes from. So even like going back to Unbound, it would be like, I know I would struggle to have a better day than I've had there. And maybe in like 5 years' time, I'll go back there and just ride it, and not try and race at the front, but have a totally different experience in the race. But, for now, I feel like I've sort of ticked that box and I'm ready to move on to something else.
Nice. Can you tell us what is next? Have you any plans for the rest of this year?
So I still race the rest of the series this year. I'd like to try and, it's funny, every year I do like some sort of ultra thing in like the middle of the season, and every time I finish I'm like, I should wait till the end of the year to do this next year, because it's such a juggling act to try and like squeeze it all in. And that was the plan this year, but I might do something in September, like a bigger ultra thing. I'm just still trying to work out if it's feasible and if logistically can make it happen. I want to ride like around Australia, which is a big ride, but it would be like supported, which is something I haven't done, which is kind of interesting to me. It's just such a big undertaking that to try and put all the pieces together from now until then will be a big undertaking. So a sort of 50-50 on that.
I have to ask, do you like sit down and draw out a Strava route for that, or how does that come together?
The good thing about Australia is there's not many roads, so there's not too many options. But yeah, I think essentially it's about 15,000 K or something. You just kind of go all the way around Oz. And initially I was looking at, there's another route in Australia, which is like surprisingly not that well known. It's like the bicentennial route, which is like a hiking, horse and bike route that goes down the kind of like the East Divide. And then in looking at that, I started looking at like around Australia, and it's like, that would be like a supported attempt. My wife was really keen on the idea, like being in the camper, and I was like, that would be something new, because I've never done something supported. I was like, that's a very different challenge, and probably be something that is good for me personally, not just like, relying on myself and thinking I can take it all on. It would be a challenge in itself. So yeah, there's a few, and plus, like, it's funny, like the more you travel and see other places, you kind of realize how little I've seen of home. So there's that element too. So there's a lot of things that make it like appealing, but then the logistics of getting a whole crew and taking it on that way is so much more difficult than just like packing your bike up and going for it. So I don't know, we'll see. If I don't do that, I'll probably find something to do like later in the year. Yeah, there's so many different options and possibilities. For the moment, I just kind of like, I think of the next event I'm going to do, which is like the Crusher, which is the next lifetime race. Yeah, I just sort of slowly hone in on that and then take the next one as it comes.
Well, if you don't do a lap of Australia, as didn't think I would find myself saying that, I'm going to keep torturing you, as I have done for a few years now, to do the Donegal Ultra 555, which is the only ultra race I've ever done, and so it would be cool to see you tackle that. What I'm interested in, just sort of wrapping up now, just based on a lap of Australia, which is just insane the more you say it. Is there any pressure? I think you've already answered, but is there any pressure? Do you feel any pressure to make whatever's next on the alt calendar, or whatever's next for Lachlan Morton, to be bigger and wilder and more extreme than the previous thing, or do you just go out and do whatever takes your fancy?
No, I think like that would be a really slippery slope, and I think like to just go bigger for the sake of going bigger is like the wrong approach. Like, I think the reason the things I've done have seemed to have gotten bigger and on a more grand scale is just the motivation, it's kind of like you're like, okay, I can handle that. I'm comfortable there. And then the motivation seems to be, all right, maybe I can take this on, be capable of it, and seeing if you're capable of it. Again, like the motivation to do something like around Australia doesn't come from it being bigger. There's just other elements that make it interesting to me. Because, yeah, at a certain point, like it has to be, well, for me, it still has to be enjoyable in a way. Like I know what it's like to push and go hard and just something be hard for hard's sake, which like if I wanted to just do something hard, I'd probably try and do 100-mile run, because that would be really difficult for me. But like, I wouldn't have the skills to make it enjoyable. So like, it's finding that balance, and it's nice to not have the pressure to just jump straight into something and say like, oh, this is what I'm going to do this year because I have to do something. So, there's no pressure in that regard. So it's nice that I can like have time to find like different challenges that speak to me a bit more than just the stats of it.
Is there any part of you ever sees yourself going back road racing? I mean, you do so many things that no other no Tour de France rider could do, but is like doing the Tour de France still something that would appeal to Lachlan Morton, or is that like you're so done with that sort of stuff?
There is like a curiosity to see if that would be possible now. Like that would be an interesting road to go down, just to purely see. It's like, could I go from where I am doing what I'm doing now, which is really removed from road racing, to go back and like complete the tour or a Grand Tour or something. That would be interesting, but there's so much I enjoy about my life now that it would be hard, I think, to step back into the more structured system that is required to compete. And also like, I love watching road racing, seeing the way that the sport has evolved. I think it's even further removed from the things I like doing racing. I mean, it makes for really good viewing, but I think like to be able to compete or just participate in those races requires like probably a pretty dramatic lifestyle shift that I'm not sure I could make, to be honest.
I'll share a story now you definitely won't know, but the first time we crossed paths was actually in a tuck shop at a ski resort in Japan, if I remember correctly, in 2016 at the Tour de Hokkaido. And I think it was the night of the second stage, and it was 3 stages that race or something, if I remember correctly. But long story short, you were in the tuck shop, and if I remember correctly, you had a 6-pack of beers in your hand that you were about to buy. And you went out the next day and won that stage. And you'd won Tour de Gila earlier that year, and then you went pro again, World Tour the following year. And the question I'm trying to get to is like, if you compare yourself now to then, is it yourself, or is it all the commitments you just mentioned that have changed about trying to become a World Tour rider that you think would be more difficult to turn back to World Tour these days?
I think it's both. If I look at the way even just like teams function, and how professional it is and how measured and calculated the approach is to achieving these, performances on the road, it's pretty wild, like even compared to when I first turned professional, it's like, yeah, there was structured training and some sort of nutritional advice, but it wasn't like anywhere near the level it is now. And then also like, yeah, again, the way I've sort of shifted my approach is, further from that. So it would be pretty hard to adapt it, I think. And it's not like a swipe at the way the sport's gone, because as I said, like as a spectator, I think it's his best time ever to watch bike racing. And the performances you get to witness are like wild. I think if I'm honest with myself, it's like it's pretty hard to see how I would fit into that world. Just if I've found like it's easy to like sit back and go, oh yeah, that'd be cool. Like to go and ride the Tour de France again, or like for the first time, but go back into that world. without really thinking through like, oh, what would that look like? And you're like, oh man, I'd have to go to like 3 different training camps. And you're like, remember the last time you went on a training camp, how much you hated it? You know what I mean? Like all those things that like, you know, the realities of it are very different. So I think like having some age and experience helps with kind of seeing what that whole path would look like and thinking things through a bit more. And also like letting go of the ego element a bit, you know, where you're like, okay, I want to prove that I can do it, you know, and to be there and race with the best when it's okay. Like I know now it's okay to just admit you're like, okay, I don't think I can, or, you know, I don't need to do that to validate myself anymore. So yeah, that's like a constant. I'm constantly trying to be aware of what my motivation is for a specific goal, and I try to remove it from like an ego thing as much as possible. But I mean, it's not that simple, but you know, at least I try a little bit now.
Yeah, well, not to massage your ego in any way, but I'll just say that I did not buy the 6-pack of beer that night, and I did not win the stage the next day. I got dropped the next day, and then I think
that was one of the hardest fought stage wins. I remember that day, and I went deep that day. And again, it was funny. It was like one of those. It was a sprint I shouldn't have won, but somehow I managed to win. Yeah, that was a good day. Good day out.
It was a nice race, a very nice race. Yeah, well, I mean, I think all that again just goes to show your versatility, swapping from in World Tour out of it back into this alternative calendar you do now, winning Unbound. Just being able to adjust bike position as much as you do without getting injured is some sort of versatility in itself. So I think that's a good place to wrap it up. And yeah, thank you for joining us on the podcast today. That was an even more fascinating conversation than I anticipated it was going to be, and I had anticipated quite the conversation. So thank you.
No, thanks for having me, mate.